If you're familiar with Greek history, you're also very familiar with the concept that Greek myth is often based on something real. Today we're going to be talking about the oracles of the dead and entrances into Hades, which are indeed based on something extremely real. There were indeed real entrances to the underworld, what they call ploutonions in the ancient world. Right? These entrances into Hades were based in areas where you would expect a hellish landscape, all right? They're going to be based in areas that are volcanic, right? These volcanic areas, the ground would emit vapors, smoke coming from them. It's going to be hot, right? There's potentially lava as well. There is the lakes and the rivers there are going to be bubbling hot, emitting poisonous vapors and boiling. The caves there are going to be mephitic vapors or harmful gases emitting from the caves in the area, right? These are all perfect locations for an entrance into death, right? Which makes sense because those places will kill you, right? So it's a perfect place to set up these ploutonions, right? Where there is an oracle of the dead that you can go to and communicate with the dead or even enter into the underworld. Now, why on earth would someone want to enter into the underworld or communicate with the dead? Well, a lost loved one, right? Somebody misses their former spouse. They can go speak to the oracle about this and potentially communicate with their deceased significant other. The other reason is a prophetic one. The dead were believed to have knowledge of the past, the present, and the future, right? It's called the Congress of the Dead. When the soul becomes deceased and goes to the underworld, they're going to share information with all the other deceased souls. These souls get together, they share information, and then all of a sudden, dead people have this immense well of knowledge and wisdom that they can pass on to the living, right? If you were to call upon them. So these oracles are going to be sought after for those reasons, right? These oracles of the dead. Now, as you can imagine, these kind of become tourist attractions, right? And the amount someone would have to pay is going to be enormous, right? In these stories, they mention having to sacrifice a large amount of cattle, bring a large amount of cattle as payment to these oracles of the dead, as well as large sums of gold, alternatively, right? Now, entrances into Hades could indeed be in caves, right? Which makes sense, right? You want to go deep down into the underworld, right? Well, a cave is going to take you deep down into the underworld. The other thing is rivers and streams, right? Especially boiling ones. Could take you into it, right? We think of the River Styx. That's the most popular one we think of now, or the Lake of Fire, right? That's the other popular one, the Lake of Fire. But the river Acheron is actually going to be the most popular in ancient times. Before we get to Acheron, we're going to briefly mention the Lernaean Lake, okay? The Lake of Lerna, which is where the Lernaean Hydra is said to have guarded a entrance into the underworld that supposedly was at the bottom of the lake. The Hydra is going to be referred to as the keeper of the gate. That's his job, the gate of Hades. He's going to be guarding it. Plutarch states that Dionysus was summoned in a strange ritual as the son of the bull, in which a strange trumpet would be blown while a lamb was cast into the waters as an offering to the Hydra. Pausanias says that Lerna was one of the entrances to the underworld and that the ancient Lernaean mysteries were based there, which were sacred to Demeter. He also says that heroes could indeed gain entry to the netherworld through the lake. He says that the lake was perilous for mortals, right? And goes on to say, and we'll quote him here, There is no limit to the depth of the lake, and I know of nobody who by any contrivance has been able to reach the bottom of it, not since Nero. Not even Nero, who had ropes made several stades long and fastened them together, tying lead to them and omitting nothing that might help his experiment, was able to discover any limit to its depth. This too I heard. The water of the lake is to all appearance calm and quiet, but although it is such to look at, every swimmer who ventures to cross it is dragged down, sucked into the depths, and swept away. All right, the idea here is that the lake is dangerous, probably due to mephitic vapor. Acheron and Thesprotia, all right? This is going to be the big one, the most popular one in ancient times. And we haven't found the location of it yet, but we have some pretty good idea of where it might be, and we're going to talk about that now. Acheron is in Epirus, right, in near the ancient city of Ephyra. The site was believed by devotees to be the door to Hades, right, the realm of the dead. The site is at the meeting point of the Acheron, the river of the lake of fire, and of the lamenting river, respectively, right? The Plutonion here at the Ephyra, right, is said to be the most important in ancient times. When Homer describes Odysseus's entrance into the underworld, he's going to state that the name of this Hadean river is indeed Acheron. Herodotus is also going, in the 5th century, is going to identify Acheron as the site of a popular oracle of the dead. Now, interestingly, there once was a lake that existed on the Acheron, right? This extinct lake might be the most likely candidate as the entrance to the underworld that they're referring to. Writing in the 5th century, Thucydides gives the earliest count of the Arcarusian lake that pours its waters into the sea. Pausanias describes, there is a water like a river, clearly intended for Acheron, with reeds growing in it, and on the river is a boat with the ferryman Charon at the oars. We may have found it right here. The Phaedo states that among the many are 4 streams, the greatest and outermost of which is called Oceanus, which flows round in a circle. And opposite this, flowing in the opposite direction, is Acheron, which flows through various desert places and passing under the earth comes to the Arcarusian lake. To this lake the souls of most of the dead go, and after remaining there the appointed time, which is for some longer and for others shorter, are sent back to be born again into living beings. Reincarnation! What? The mysteries of Asia! Oh no, they're here in Greece. If you don't know, the Greeks in India, right, exchanged a lot of information in very ancient times, so these ideas are being traded back and forth. Back to the lake. The Greek playwright Aristophanes, in The Frogs, describes Acheron as a grisly cliffside river dripping with blood, with hounds of Coictus, or Furies. Herodotus describes an event that occurs at Acheron. And we'll quote him here. Periander had sent messengers to the oracle of the dead on the river Acheron in Thesprotia, right, to inquire concerning a deposit that a friend had left, probably money. But Melissa, in apparition, said that she would tell him nothing, nor reveal where the deposit lay, for she was cold and naked. This is Melissa the ghost, right? He wants to get the ghost to tell him where the gold is. The garments, Melissa said, with which Periander had buried with her had never been burnt and were of no use to her. So she needs burnt clothes. When this message was brought back to Periander, right? So Periander is not communicating with her directly. The Oracle of the Dead is saying, all right, I'll be right back. I'll go talk to her. The Oracle goes away and comes back with a message. He says that when this message was brought back to Periander, immediately after the message, he made a proclamation that all the Corinthian women should come out into the temple of Hera. They then came out as to a festival, all the women did, wearing their most beautiful garments, and Periander set his guards there and stripped them all, ladies, serving women, and he heaped all the clothes in a pit, where as he prayed to the ghost Melissa, he burnt all the clothes. When he had done all this and sent a second message through the oracle, the ghost of Melissa told him where the deposit of the friend had been laid, where the gold was. Now, back to the lake. Archaeologists in 1992 revealed that the extinct Archerusian lake had been formed somewhere between the 8th and the 5th centuries BC. Today, this lake no longer exists. It was gotten rid of in World War I, backfilled for agriculture. But the Archerusian lake and its environment had a long-standing reputation as a dangerous and even hellish area. So there would naturally be, obviously, an Oracle of the Dead in the vicinity. In the story of Orpheus, right? On the story of Orpheus, Pausanias is going to say, others have said that for Eurydice's sake, Orpheus came to Ornum and Thesprotis, where of old was an oracle of the dead. Now, the word Ornum means birdless, right? And that word birdless, when referring to the lake, is going to be used to denote the deadly nature of these toxic swamps and this lake that emitted mephitic vapors, which would have resembled Hadean breath, right? The breath of Hades, or even the breath of the hellhound Cerberus. Now, these mephitic lakes, birds were said to not fly over such regions, as the vapors would kill smaller creatures, right? So insects, small animals, even some cattle, and it would certainly make people sick if they spent enough time there. In addition, interestingly, to this lake being toxic, the swamplands were also known to breed malaria, right? That's another way to death, right? The 19th century British explorer and travelogue, James Henry Skene, talks about this in this Archerusian lake and in its connection to an infernal underworld. He talks about and says that that these ancient people, right, this pestilent vapor emanates from the lake, but malaria is common here. And the ancients, ignorant of the nature of the marsh miasma, may have attributed its effects to the deadly efflua emitted by the infernal lake. All right, so it gives you an idea that the entrance to the underworld probably was this Acherusian lake in Akron. The Phlegraean fields, meaning fire, the fields of fire. This is an interesting location. It is a highly volcanic area. We're going to take a look at the map here. We can see that here, this whole area here is known as the Phlegraean fields. In it, we see Lake Avernus, which is also going to have an supposed entrance to the underworld. But to the south, we're going to see Baiae, right, which is also another entrance to the underworld. So this is a location of a lot of association with Hades here in Italy, right? This is the bay where Naples is, well, later is. And the Italians, the Romans, as we know, borrow lots of Greek myth, and they're going to take the Greek myth of the river Acheron and the lake of fire, and they're going to move it to Italy, to this location, so they can have their very own myths of hell associated and here, centered here. Now, the interesting thing about the fields of fire, which, by the way, this whole area is a volcanic one, all right? The CommandSybil is a priestess, right, presiding over the Apollyon oracle at Cumae, right, which is this Greek colony that predates Naples in Italy. The word Sibyl, right, is from the ancient Greek word Sibylla, meaning a prophetess, right? There's going to be many Sibyls. This is not just, a name. It's a title. In the Aeneid by Virgil, the CommandSybil prophesies by seeing the fates and writing on oak leaves. These would be arranged inside the entrance of her cave, but if the wind blew and scattered them, she would not help to reassemble the leaves and recreate the prophecy. The Sibyl is a guide into the underworld, right? Whose entrance, it is said, lay at the nearby crater of Avernus, right? Lake Avernus. Aeneas is said to have employed her services before his descent into the underworld to visit his dead father, Anchius, right? But she warned him that it would be, going into hell would be no easy undertaking. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, although the Sibyl is mortal, it is said she lived about 1,000 years. She attained this longevity when Apollo offered to grant her a wish in exchange for her virginity, as in sex. She took a handful of sand and asked to live for as many years as the grains of sand she held. Later, after she refused the god's sexual advances, he allowed her body to wither away because she had failed to ask for eternal youth. Her body supposedly grew smaller with age and eventually was kept in a jar. Eventually, only her voice was left. That's in Metamorphoses. In the fourth of Virgil's eclogues, it appears to contain a messianic, a prophecy of the Messiah by Sibyl. In it, she foretells the coming of a Savior whom Christians identified as Jesus. For this reason, Emperor Constantine, the first Christian emperor, reads a long passage from the 8th book of the Sibylline Oracles. We believe this oracle was without a doubt a real one. She is real. Some of the legends may not be, but this is a real person, and there really are oracles of the dead here in the fields of fire. And they're going to be called Sibyl. The books attributed to Sibyl are going to be a real testament to her existence. The books of the Sibyl were said to have been acquired by Tarquinius Priscus, which is said to have been the last king of Rome before it became a republic. Dionysius of Halicarnassus recounts the story centuries ago, concurrent with the 50th Olympiad, that not long before the expulsion of Rome's kings, an old woman who was not native of the country arrived incognita in Rome. She offered 9 books of the prophecies to King Tarquin, and as the king declined to purchase them owing to the exorbitant price she demanded, she burned 3 and offered the remaining 6 to Tarquin at the same price. When he refused again, whereupon she burned 3 more and repeated her offer. Tarquin then relented and purchased the last 3 at the full price, whereupon she disappeared from the world of men. These books were thereafter kept in the temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill in Rome to be consulted only in emergencies. The temple burned down in the 80 BC, and the books with it, necessitating a recollection of the Sibylline prophecies from all parts of the empire, according to Tacitus. These were carefully sorted and those determined to be legitimate were saved in a rebuilt temple. The Emperor Augustus had them moved to the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill, where they remained for most of the imperial period until what is believed to be 405 AD is when they ceased to exist. But the Roman government spent an immense amount of resources to try to reacquire the Sibylline oracles once the originals were burned. There are still books written by Sybil, or supposedly, but due to that they contain much Jewish and Christian influence, so they aren't believed to be the original thing. Next, Lake Avernus and Campania, right? Lake Avernus, as we saw on the map, is a volcanic crater in the Fields of Fire, located in the Avernus crater. The word inferno, right, which is the Italian word for the underworld or hell, is related to Averno, right, which is the Italian form of Avernus, right, the lake Avernus. At one time, people living around the lake believed that it was bottomless and called it the Styx, according to Tesorario. Running between Earth and the underworld, the Styx carried the departed to Hades. So strong was this belief that residents refused to drink from the stream nearby that ran underground out to the sea. Again, the Romans have taken the myth of Acheron and the entrances of the underworld and just relocated them to this area. Avernus, right, we talked about in the Aeneid of Virgil, how the Sibyl is going to take him down into this crater, and that's how he's going to enter the underworld. Now, as we talked about these mephitic lakes in the last one, all the birds, according to tradition, flying over the lake were destined to fall dead, hence the name it's also referred to as a birdless lake. Right, this was likely due to toxic fumes that the mouths of the crater of Avernus gave off into the atmosphere. Strabo records that Lake Avernus in Italy had been taken as a Ploutonion, right, an oracle and a temple of the dead there, because the gases it produced were so noxious that they overwhelmed birds flying overhead. On the shores of the lake is a grotto, which they believed was the home of the CommandSybil, which is also where temples of Apollo and Jupiter lay. Now we're going to get into the other place in the region, Baiae, right? Near Lake Avernus, the CommandSybil prophesies, as we talked about, by seeing the fates, writing on oak leaves. It's clear she had a cave, right? She mentions this being a cave. And that she was this guide to the underworld. Well, they have found a strange cave that has been altered to be more like a underground temple, all right, in Baiae. Now, this underground temple is believed to have been built around 550 BC, around the time actually in which the Sibyl was said to have lived. Most of this tunnel system, and we'll get a chart for you here, is under 30 to 60 feet of dirt, right? It's buried. Now, temperatures inside this cave reach 120 degrees due to geothermal fissures. And the water in the cave, which appears much like the river Styx, is boiling water. You can see in these pictures that the water is literally boiling. The cave has many corridors of what was once a sophisticated circuitry of stairs and passageways, right? It's always bending, always turning. But it says now they are no longer connected, but instead in dirt and water. So many of these passageways are yet to be unearthed down here. The fact that it had a ceremonial function is uncontested, right? There are huge numbers of niches for oil lamps, about every yard throughout all the tunnels levels. The layout of the complex is rather complex, and it seems to have been designed to conceal the mysteries of it. But obviously here you have an area, and here's one of the doorways here. You could see an inscription made there to the gods. But as you can see, it's very hot down there. It's 120 degrees. There is a Hadean river, Styx, a boiling underground river. That would have been terrifying, right? And these areas were known to be, things were burned, drugs were burned and put into the air, meals were fed to cause tourists or those visiting to suffer from hallucinations. This is not a good place to be while having hallucinations, especially when you believe you are actually entering into the underworld, right? So this is a very, very convincing place as a plutonian, right? And it's probably one of the best preserved we have. Elysius, right? Elysius, excuse me, is our next one. It's the sacred district of the city. It is one of the most important religious centers in Greece, all the way back to the 16th century BC, all the way to the 4th century AD. The popular festival was known as the Rites of Elysius or the Elysian Mysteries. During these festivals, participants asked the goddess Demeter for a successful harvest. Demeter is asked for a successful harvest because, according to legend, Hades once traveled through a cavern located in the sacred district to abduct Demeter's daughter Persephone, right, whom he had fallen for. At Elysius, the Plutonian, right, or Oracle of the Dead, was near the north entrance to the sacred district. It was built by Pisistratos in the 6th century BC and rebuilt 2 centuries later, when the Elysian Mysteries were at the height of their influence. All right, the cave was the traditional site of the birth of the divine child of Plutos. Not much to say about that one. Heraclea Pontica is on the coast of the Black Sea. This 5th century BC Oracle of the Dead at Heraclea was based on an elaborate cave system in the Greek colony of Bithynia, near their own localized version of the myth of Acheron and the Arcarusian Lake. A once natural cave here was chiseled away to create an artificial underworld devoted to Heracles, which is, they're obviously going to attach the myth of Heracles' descent into the underworld and, his combat with Cerberus. Apollonius of Rhodes recounts the locals believed this is the location Hercules had entered the underworld. And obviously the city is now mostly swallowed up by the modern city of Heraclea. All right, so not going to find much remnants of it now. Tyron in the Mani Peninsula in Greece. It was supposedly one of the most popular of the Plutonian sites, attached to the myth, again, of the descent of Persephone, right? Another one, it's also going to be another once chiseled, a cave, natural cave that's been chiseled away at, and they added artificial walling to create this artificial underworld with man-made niches and platforms for the votive offerings. They're going to be carved into the stone, so their caves looked less like a cave and more like a temple. It was a state-sponsored oracle of Sparta. that was active from the 7th century BC to the 2nd century AD. So a very long time, this was an oracle of the dead. We're going to get to our last one now, and we got a lot of great pictures here. The Plutonion at Hieropolis. Right? This is amazing stuff. Take a look at this statue of Cerberus they found there. It's in modern-day Turkey, or Asia Minor, which, you know, was part of the Greek world before the invasion of the Turks, right? It was functional as a temple from 190 BC to the 6th century AD. This cave was and is still to this day filled with toxic carbon monoxide. These poisonous gases meant this was, in fact, a very real entrance to the world of the dead. As the gases, obviously, you enter into this place, you're going to die, and therefore, congratulations, you've entered into the underworld. Animal sacrifices were said to have routinely been sent into the cave, right? Once deceased from the noxious gases, they'd be pulled back by the rope out of the cave. Now, the people back then believed these poisonous gases were released by Hades to kill all who tried to enter his domain, right? Hades doesn't want you to enter Hades, right? That's why he's got Cerberus as a guard and the Hydra as a guard, and all these other things. So it makes sense. Both Strabo and Pliny mention that the priests of the shrine, known as the Galli, proved their priestly power by going into the cave without dying, either by holding their breath or by knowing where the air pockets in the cave were located. According to the archaeologist who unearthed the site, Dr. Deandra, the site was famous for the rites of incubation. Pilgrims took to the waters in the pool near the temple, slept not too far from the cave, and received visions and prophecies in a sort of Oracle of Delphi effect. The fumes coming forth from the depths of Hieropolis groundwater produced hallucinations. Some 2,500 years ago, he states, people came to this thermal source to recover their health, right? These hot waters. After a certain age, they began living here and were buried here when they died. The ancient site of Hieropolis then grew to become a giant necropolis centered on this very sacred cave. Now, the site, as you can imagine, functioned as a religious tourist destination. The temple sold many animals for sacrifice, right? They had a gift shop where you could buy an animal to kill. Including the most popular thing was birds, right? They'd sell little birds to the tourists so that the tourists could go near the entrance of the cave, right? Of this terrible thing here. And they could release the bird near the entrance to the cave and see for themselves the deadly phenomena, right? Strabo in Geographica described the entrance, known as the Gate of Pluto, as follows. Any animal that passes inside meets instant death. I threw in sparrows, and they immediately breathed their last and fell. Dead, right? This is very popular for these tourists. They want to buy the bird. Oh, we came all this way. We got to buy the bird. We got to test it out. And of course, the bird died, and oh, wow, they weren't joking. This really is the entrance to the underworld, right? Very believable. There's more talk of this idea of dreaming and incubation at the site, right? The Neoplatist Damascus went there and stated that he dreamed that he was Attis in the company of the Great Mother. Now, the Great Mother being a Phrygian female god. This is originally Phrygian territory. This Great Mother was their patron god. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed this today. Watching this, I hope we learned a few things. I certainly saw a lot of interesting stuff. We learned some about the oracles of the dead and of these real-life entrances to the underworld. It's a great mystery where some of these are located. And truthfully, they were located all over the ancient world, these ploutonions were. Any cave could be quickly turned into an entrance to the underworld, right? So there are many that lay undiscovered. So if you're an archaeologist or want to be one, go hunting for these, if you please, because we'd all like to find more of these really cool locations. If you'd like to learn more about oracles of the dead or necromancy, we cover that in a lot more detail, right? Technically, these oracles of the dead were indeed necromancers. We cover necromancy a lot more, including mostly its evil forms in Evil Magic in Rome, our video on that. If you enjoyed this video and like to see more, you're welcome to subscribe or like the video. And if you have comments or you have questions, please comment. I'm more than happy to answer. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.